I don't remember the exact moment the car stopped spinning, only the sound, metal scraping asphalt, glass exploding like a shower of tiny stars, and my own voice, sharp and terrified, filling the darkness. When everything finally went still, there was a ringing in my ears so loud I thought the world had gone mute. Rain tapped against the shattered windshield in quick, nervous beats. I tasted blood. My hands trembled as I lifted them, checking if they were still attached, still mine. The airbag hung in front of me like a deflated parachute, and the smell of burnt rubber made my stomach lurch. I wasn't dead. At least, I didn't think so. Okay, breathe, I whispered to myself, though my chest felt like a weight was pressing down on it. My phone had flown somewhere near the passenger side. I could see the faint glow of the screen under the crumpled seat. Reaching for it felt like climbing a mountain with broken bones. Every inch sent a bolt of pain up my ribs, but I dragged myself toward it until my fingertips brushed the cold edge. When the screen finally unlocked, my first instinct was immediate and automatic. Call my husband. My safe place, my constant. My purse in the phone rang, and rang, then voicemail. I stared at the cracked screen, confused. He always answered. Even if he was busy, he'd text back, "I'll call you right back." I tried again. Voicemail. My throat tightened. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was in the shower. Maybe he'd call back any second. I typed quickly through shaking hands. I was in an accident. Please come. I hit send and collapsed back against the seat, my vision blurring. The rain grew heavier outside, drumming against the hood. The hazard lights blinked weakly, a fading heartbeat in the storm. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer, I couldn't tell. Pain twisted time into strange shapes. I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for it to light up, waiting for his name to appear. Nothing. Where are you? I whispered. A pair of headlights cut through the rain, stopping a short distance behind my car. A moment later, someone pounded on my window. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A man shouted through the glass. I nodded weakly. He pulled the door as far open as the bent metal allowed. "Don't move too much. We've got help on the way." I blinked at him. Did my husband call you?" He shook his head. "No, someone else reported the crash. An officer's already on the way with an ambulance." A cold wave rolled through me, not from the rain, not from the pain, but from something deeper. Something I didn't have the strength to name yet. The man stayed by the door, trying to keep me awake. He asked questions, my name, the date, where I was headed, but my mind kept drifting to only one. Why hadn't my husband answered? By the time the paramedics arrived, I was shivering uncontrollably. They placed a blanket over me, secured my neck brace, gently lifted me onto the stretcher. "Don't worry," one of them said. "We'll contact your family." I swallowed hard. "He still hasn't responded." The paramedic paused. "We'll keep trying." As they closed the ambulance doors, I clutched my silent phone, staring at the unread message that should have been answered instantly. The thought hit me with more force than the crash itself. Why didn't my husband come? And somewhere inside me, a tiny, terrified voice whispered, or what if he chose not to? The hospital ceiling tiles were the same pale, soulless color as the walls, blurry squares of nothing that I kept staring at to distract myself from the pain in my ribs. But the pain wasn't what bothered me most. It was the silence. My phone sat on the tray beside my bed, screen up, volume all the way high. Every few minutes it would dim and I'd tap it awake, hoping for a notification, any notification, from him. Nothing. The nurse had bandaged my arm, checked my vitals, and spoken to me twice, each time glancing at the phone as if expecting it to ring. But it never did. "Are you sure your husband knows you're here?" she finally asked gently. I forced a thin smile. "He'll come." Even as I said it, doubt knotted in my stomach. 2 hours. 2 entire hours since the accident. 2 hours of waiting. 2 hours of imagining him rushing into the room with panic in his eyes, apologizing for being late. But the door stayed closed. When it finally opened, I lifted my head so quickly my neck throbbed. Relief washed over me for half a second, until he stepped inside. He didn't look frantic. He didn't look scared. He didn't look like a man who just discovered his wife could have died. He looked put together. His shirt wasn't wrinkled. His hair wasn't messy. And the scent that hit me wasn't sweat or stress. It was cologne. Fresh. Expensive. The kind he only wore for special occasions. And underneath that cologne was something else. Steak. Charred, buttery, rosemary-infused steak. Exactly the kind served at the fancy restaurant downtown. The one we only went to on anniversaries. My heart sank. "Baby," he said breathlessly. Except he wasn't out of breath. "Oh my God, are you okay? I came as soon as I saw your text." I stared at him. "You didn't see my calls? My messages?" He scratched the back of his neck. "My phone died. I was, stuck at work. It's been crazy tonight." His voice wavered, but his eyes didn't. They were too steady, too rehearsed. "You smell like food," I whispered. "Yeah, the guys ordered takeout. It spilled in the car." He gestured vaguely, already avoiding eye contact. The lies didn't fit. Not one of them. Before I could push further, my phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. Normally I would have ignored it. But something, instinct, fate, God, I don't know, forced me to tap it open. It was a tagged photo. A friend of a friend had shared a story. A dimly lit luxury restaurant. Gold accents. A table set with wine. Glasses and a perfectly seared steak, and there he was, my husband, smiling, relaxed, leaning, slightly toward the woman sitting across from him, her just a co-worker, the woman he once described as nothing to worry about. She was wearing a red dress, leaning forward with her hand resting too comfortably near his. Their plates were already half empty, like they'd been there a while. My hand trembled as I zoomed in. He wasn't panicking about me. He wasn't rushing to the hospital. He wasn't even working. He was having dinner, laughing, enjoying himself, with her. My throat tightened so much I could barely breathe. "Everything okay?" he asked, stepping closer. Too casually, too quickly, as if he knew what I was looking at. Instead of answering, I turned the screen toward him. "You were working, huh?" His face drained of color. Before he could speak, another notification popped up under the photo. A new comment, from her, a single red heart emoji, bright, bold, intimate, public. And suddenly, the room felt colder than the night of the accident. I thought showing him the photo would open his eyes, or at least force honesty out of him. Instead, he barely glanced at the screen before rolling his shoulders back like he was preparing for a tedious argument. His jaw tightened, but not with guilt. "With annoyance, seriously?" he muttered. "You're going to start this now?" "Start what?" I had almost died. My car was crushed. My body ached in places I didn't even know could hurt. And yet the way he looked at me made me feel like I was inconveniencing him. "I just want to understand," I whispered. "You said you were working. But you were with her, and you ignored my calls. Why?" He let out a frustrated breath, the kind he usually reserved for slow Wi-Fi or traffic jams. "You're being overdramatic. You always jump to the worst possible conclusion." My stomach twisted. "I was in an accident." "Yes," he said, throwing his hands up. "A small one." "You're fine. They said you didn't even need surgery. So why are you blowing this up?" "Small." He called the crash small, like the metal folding around me had been a minor inconvenience. Like the fear clawing up my throat as I waited alone in the rain had been an exaggeration. Before I could respond, he started pacing, muttering under his breath. "Unbelievable. I can't even have dinner without getting attacked. I didn't see your messages." I explained that. But he hadn't explained anything, and deep down, he knew it. His eyes flicked to my phone again, and something inside him hardened. "You know what your problem is? You always need attention. The second something doesn't go your way, you make it about betrayal." The words slapped me harder than the accident did. Attention? Was it attention when I begged him to come to couples counseling? Was it attention when I waited alone on our anniversary because he forgot to set an alarm? Was it attention when he'd leave for late-night work projects and come home smelling like a perfume that wasn't mine? A memory flashed. 2 years ago, the night I cooked a full anniversary dinner. I lit candles, wore the dress he once called his favorite, and opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving. He texted me at 9:14 p.m. Sorry, babe, something came up. Rain check? Something. It was always something with him. Another memory surfaced, finding a text from that same woman at 1 a.m. Thanks for tonight. I had such a great time. He swore it was a team outing. He swore she texted everyone. He swore I was imagining things. I never pushed harder than that. Maybe because I wanted to believe him. Maybe because I was tired of feeling like the needy wife. Maybe because somewhere along the way, he convinced me that my instincts were flaws. But now, lying in a hospital bed while he stood there smelling like expensive steak and entitlement, the truth felt impossible to ignore. I'm not being dramatic, I said quietly. I needed you. And you weren't there, he scoffed. Actually scoffed. You're alive, aren't you? So can we stop this? I had one night out. One. And you're acting like I committed a crime. My chest tightened. Not from the injuries, but from realizing I didn't recognize the man in front of me. This wasn't love. This wasn't partnership. This was dismissal wrapped in gaslighting, served with a side of contempt. I opened my mouth to speak again, but a knock interrupted the tension. A uniformed police officer stepped inside, hat tucked under his arm. He gave me a polite nod. Ma'am, I'm here to take your statement about the collision. My husband immediately straightened, trying to look involved, concerned, supportive, all the things he hadn't been when it mattered. But the officer didn't seem interested in him. His eyes stayed on me. I'm glad you're okay, the officer said. But there's something unusual we noticed at the scene. A ripple of dread moved through my body. The officer glanced between us before continuing. It looks like your car might have been hit twice, once from the side and once from behind, almost as if someone pushed the impact. My breath caught. Twice? Pushed? My husband froze. And suddenly the accident didn't feel like an accident anymore. The officer pulled a small notepad from his pocket, his expression calm but far too focused to be casual. Your accident site was unusual, he began, choosing each word carefully. Typically, when one car collides with another, especially in the rain, we see skid marks. Some attempt to brake, a correction, something. He paused before meeting my eyes. We didn't find any. A cold prickle spread across my skin. None? I asked. He shook his head. None. And that's not the part that bothered us most. My husband let out an irritated groan. Here we go, he muttered, crossing his arms like the officer was reciting a bad conspiracy theory. The officer ignored him. The impact marks on your vehicle were clean, too clean. No swerve, no angle adjustment. Whoever hit you didn't attempt to avoid you. If anything, it looked... Accidents happen. My husband cut in sharply. It was raining. People panic. They freeze. Why are you scaring her with this? The officer stopped speaking mid-sentence and turned to him slowly. His expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. Sir, I'm simply informing her of what we observed. Well, maybe don't, my husband snapped. She's recovering. She doesn't need dramatic theories right now. Dramatic. There it was again. His favorite word to dismiss my reality. The officer studied him longer this time, his gaze cool and assessing. My husband pretended not to notice, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed him. I just want to take her statement, the officer said, voice steady. If you don't mind. I do mind, my husband shot back. This is unnecessary. The insurance will handle everything. There's no point dragging this out. Dragging this out? Insurance? Since when did he care about paperwork more than my life? Sir, the officer said, tone firming, accidents involving potential negligence or intent are not just insurance issues. Now, if you'd please step aside, I'd like to continue. My husband's jaw clenched. I could almost hear his teeth grinding. He looked from the officer to me, silently demanding that I take his side. That I shut this down. That I protect him from whatever this conversation might expose. For the first time, I didn't. It's okay, I whispered. I want to hear what he has to say. My husband exhaled sharply, offended, but he stepped back a single grudging inch. The officer nodded gratefully and continued. The other concerning detail was the second point of impact. A second? I asked softly. Yes. Your car was hit from the side, and then from behind. The spacing between the impacts suggests they did not occur in one continuous moment. It looked like the first collision spun you, and then another force pushed you further. My heartbeat quickened. Like someone hit me again? It's a possibility, he said gently. My husband threw his hands up. This is ridiculous. You think someone targeted her? For what? She's a school administrator, not a mafia boss. This is insane. The officer didn't flinch. I didn't say targeted. I said unusual. Then turning to me, he added, I also find it odd that the other vehicle didn't stay. No witnesses. No cameras nearby. Almost like whoever did it didn't want to be found. My husband scoffed loudly. Maybe because they were drunk. Or didn't have insurance. Stop trying to make this some movie plot. The officer looked at him for a long, very long moment. Sir, where were you tonight? The room went still. My husband froze. Excuse me? It's a standard question for close contacts, the officer said calmly. Just noting the timeline. My timeline is none of your business, my husband barked. I was out. That's all you need to know. With who? The officer pressed. That doesn't matter. It does if we're trying to rule things out. My husband stepped forward, anger radiating off him. Are you accusing me of something? I didn't accuse you, the officer replied, voice even. But your hostility is noted. Hostility noted. My husband backed off, arms crossing tightly, eyes burning with silent fury. The officer returned his attention to me. Ma'am, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Before I could answer, my husband exploded. Absolutely not. Anything you say to her, you say in front of me. The officer's expression didn't change, but his tone did. Sir, if you continue to interfere, I'll have to ask you to leave the room. I had never seen anyone talk to my husband that way. And even more shocking, he actually shut up. The officer stepped closer to my bedside, lowering his voice just enough. I need to ask you something. Off the record, my pulse thudded in my ears. Okay. He glanced toward the doorway where my husband stood rigid, seething. Do you have any enemies? He asked quietly. Anyone who might want to harm you, or anyone who stands to gain if you're out of the picture. My breath caught. Enemies? Gain? I suddenly wasn't sure the most dangerous part of my night had been the crash. It might have been the man waiting just outside the door. I woke up the next morning with a dull ache behind my eyes. The kind that feels like your body is trying to whisper truths your mind isn't ready to hear. The rain outside the hospital window tapped softly, steady and indifferent, like it had been all along. I reached for my phone out of habit, not expectation. My husband hadn't checked on me once during the night, and I wasn't sure whether knowing that hurt more than the crash itself. But instead of his name, another one appeared across my screen. Sophie. My stomach sank. We weren't friends. We were barely acquaintances. She was the woman my husband always introduced with forced casualness. Oh, that's Sophie, just a coworker. She's harmless. Followed by a laugh that was a bit too tight. I opened her message with trembling fingers. Hey, I hope you're okay. He told me you were at home resting. Home. Resting. The hospital monitors beeped steadily beside me, as if mocking the idea. Why would he lie to her about something so basic? Why tell her I was home when he'd visited me here unless he needed her to think I was somewhere else? I read the message again, slower this time, letting the words settle in the hollow space behind my ribs. Immediately, another text followed. I feel terrible that you're not feeling well. My thumb hovered, unsure if I should respond, ignore her, or throw my phone across the room. Curiosity 1, I'm in the hospital, I typed. Car accident. 3 dots appeared instantly, blinking like a frantic heartbeat. Hospital? He didn't tell me that. He just said you were tired and wanted him to give you space tonight. Space? That was what he'd been giving me? While I was bleeding on the side of the road? A quiet, cold realization settled over me. He wasn't lying to just me. He had built an entire ecosystem of lies and fed it to both of us. Sophie kept typing. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. We wouldn't have gone out if I knew. We wouldn't have gone out. My chest tightened. He told me they rarely saw each other outside of work. Where did you go? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. as if we were discussing weekend plans and not the unraveling of my marriage. Her response came too easily. Too honestly, just dinner. Same place he likes, Del Mar. We always go there when he needs to unwind. I promise it wasn't planned. My breath stilled. Always go there. Not once. Not occasionally. Always. The smell of cologne and steakhouse air from the night before clung to my memory like smoke. It wasn't a one-off dinner. It never had been. My hands shook as I typed. How often do you two go out? A pause. A long one this time, as if she realized she might be stepping into something she didn't want to be part of. Then, I don't want to cause issues. He said things were basically over between you two, that you were staying together for practical reasons. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. Practically over? Staying together for practical reasons? I read the line again, then again, each repetition slicing deeper than the first. The betrayal felt different this time, less like shock, more like confirmation. Like a puzzle that had been missing its last piece, and suddenly everything made terrible, perfect sense. And then another message arrived, almost a whisper of guilt. He told me you two sleep in separate rooms. I didn't think I was hurting anyone. We had never slept in separate rooms, not once. Something inside me cracked, not loudly but decisively, like the soft snap of a thread under tension. Years of excuses, uncertainties, little red flags I pushed aside. They all came rushing back in a flood of unwelcome clarity. Before I could respond, another bubble popped up. Honestly, I'm shocked he didn't tell you about dinner. He said you were used to it. Used to it? Used to him disappearing at night? Used to him choosing someone else's company over mine? My chest tightened until it hurt. Then came the final blow. By the way, here's the picture from last night. You look really pretty in your profile photo BTWE. A photo attachment loaded slowly, the hospital Wi-Fi making it crawl onto my screen, bit by agonizing bit. At first, all I saw was the dark mahogany wood of Del Mar's signature table, then the glow of candlelight, the edge of a wine glass, a man's sleeve I recognized instantly, navy blue with a subtle pinstripe he only wore on nights he wanted to impress big clients. And then the full picture appeared. My husband, sitting across from her, laughing, leaning in, looking alive in a way he rarely looked with me anymore. The timestamp in the corner glowed like a brand. 9:14 p.m. The exact minute I had called him from the side of the road. The exact minute my voicemail went unanswered. The exact minute I whispered for help while he smiled at another woman. I stared at the photo, my pulse roaring in my ears. I wasn't sure which was worse. The betrayal, the lies, or the fact he never even planned to tell me the truth. And then Sophie sent one last message. He said you never call at night. Thought you'd be asleep. I looked at the timestamp again, a cold certainty forming inside me. He hadn't just ignored me. He'd chosen not to answer. And now, finally, I knew it. The hospital room felt colder that afternoon, though I wasn't sure whether it was the draft from the vent or the chill settling inside my chest. After Sophie's messages, sleep was impossible. Even closing my eyes made the scene replay itself, him laughing in warm candlelight while I lay bleeding in the rain. That photo had carved something raw and irreparable inside me, and now silence was just an invitation for my mind to start connecting dots I'd tried so hard not to see. So I did what any betrayed woman does when the truth starts whispering. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out my phone. The first thing I checked was our call log. My call the night of the accident showed as no answer, but I already knew that. What struck me was the timeline around it. A missed call from me at 9:14 p.m., and then, at 9:17 p.m., an outgoing call from him. To Sophie, 3 minutes. He didn't call an ambulance. He didn't call me back. He didn't even check the voicemail I left in tears. He called her. My throat tightened as I scrolled further. There were other calls too, late night ones, early morning ones, calls during times he'd told me he was in meetings. They weren't long, but they were frequent. Like pulses, little secret conversations threaded through the day. I moved to the next ugly step. Bank accounts. He rarely used cash. He liked digital convenience. It made this part easy. I logged into our shared account. My name was still on it. and my stomach clenched as the list of transactions appeared. Del Mar Steakhouse, 242.18. Del Mar Steakhouse, 199.40. Luna Bistro, 143.92. Del Mar, 251.17. Not once or twice. Not occasionally, they were weekly. Sometimes more. He had never taken me anywhere that often. I couldn't remember the last time he planned a dinner date. Maybe 2 birthdays ago? And even then, he'd complained about the prices before we ordered. A bitter laugh nearly escaped me. He was willing to spend on romance, just not with his wife. I swallowed hard and kept digging, even though each new discovery felt like another blow to the ribs. There were also Uber receipts, midday ones from places nowhere near his office. Jewelry purchases, small ones, subtle enough to avoid suspicion. And reservations under his name at a cocktail lounge he once swore he hated because it was pretentious. Pretentious with me, perfectly enjoyable with her. A lump rose in my throat, heavy and acidic. The pieces weren't just fitting together, they were snapping into place with painful clarity. A notification buzzed across my screen, making me flinch. Your voicemail from last night hasn't been listened to, not even now. He still hadn't checked it. The message I left him, the panic, the fear, the desperation, it had just been sitting there, unheard, unwanted, unimportant. I blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in my eyes. Crying hurt, physically hurt, but holding it in hurt worse. I set my phone down and let my head sink back into the pillow. My chest felt hollow, scraped clean by the truth I could no longer deny. I could have died. Actually died. My car had been hit twice. The officer said it could have been deliberate. My husband didn't answer. He didn't call for help. He didn't even know I was alive until the hospital called him hours later. And where was he? Smiling over steak and wine with another woman, telling her our marriage was practically over, using phrases like space and unwind to justify their intimacy. My stomach twisted violently. I pressed my hand against it, trying to steady myself. The emotional low point hit not like a punch, but like a slow collapse, as if every lie he'd ever told was settling onto my shoulders at once. He wasn't just neglectful. He wasn't just inattentive. He had mentally stepped out of our marriage long before this accident ever happened, and that thought terrified me far more than the crash itself. Wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand and picked my phone. Back up, not to scroll this time, but to analyze. To think, to see what all of this meant. The patterns were undeniable now. The secret dinners, the matching timelines, the lies told with a straight face, the way he tried to silence the officer, the way he bristled at questions, and the worst part, I had been so ready to blame myself, to think I was imagining things, to believe I was overreacting. But I wasn't. I was the only one reacting at all. The hospital hallway outside my door was quiet, except for a nurse chatting softly a few rooms down. I listened to the muffled sounds, grounding myself in the moment. If I didn't anchor my mind, it would spiral places I wasn't ready to go yet. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the sterile hospital air fill my lungs. A thought surfaced, dark, uninvited but not entirely irrational now. What if the accident wasn't an accident? My phone buzzed in my hand. I opened my eyes slowly, already bracing myself for another message from Sophie. Or worse, from him. But it wasn't either of them. It was a number I didn't recognize at first. Then my breath caught. This is Officer Ramirez. We've found something relevant to your case. Please call me back as soon as possible. My heart stopped mid-beat. Relevant. Not routine. Not standard. Something. I stared at the message, pulse pounding, knowing deep down that whatever they found wasn't going to make anything better. The phone rang again, jolting me upright in the hospital bed. My pulse raced before I even saw the number. I answered cautiously, breath shallow. Hello? I whispered. Ma'am, this is Officer Ramirez, the familiar voice said. We've located the driver of your accident. I froze. You found him? Yes, he replied. We spoke to him this morning. He claimed someone told him the road would be empty that night. The words made my stomach twist. Told him? I echoed. Who would? That's what we're trying to determine, Officer Ramirez said. The phrasing is odd, very specific, almost Like someone knew you'd be there. I swallowed hard. A cold, crawling dread washed over me. The first thought that came unbidden. He knew. The officer continued, his tone steady but careful. We need to confirm. Did anyone have knowledge of your route that evening? Anyone who could have predicted where you would be? I hesitated. Every instinct in me screamed to speak the truth, but saying it out loud made it painfully real. Yes, I whispered. My husband. There it was, the name I'd been trying not to voice. The man who had ignored my calls, who had smiled across candlelit tables while I bled by the roadside. He knew. Officer Ramirez didn't flinch. That's important. It doesn't mean he did anything, but it's critical for us to understand who had access to that information. I pressed my fingers into the hospital sheets, trying to steady myself. My heart was hammering, not from pain, but from the cold realization that the person I had trusted most could have had a hand, directly or indirectly, in what happened to me. Ma'am, Officer Ramirez said softly, I need you to know you have leverage here. The driver's account is inconsistent. He says he was told the road would be empty, which raises questions. And if anyone tried to interfere with emergency response, like delaying calls for help, that's a crime too. The words echoed in my skull, interfering with emergency response. That was exactly what had happened. The voicemail I left unanswered, the calls ignored, the time he chose to spend elsewhere while I struggled alone. For the first time, that helplessness began to shift. Fear was still there, yes, but under it was something I hadn't felt in months. Power. The officer paused, letting me breathe, and then asked, We'll need to verify your call attempts. May we have your phone? I hesitated. My fingers tightened around the device, the same device that had captured every lie, every ignored cry for help, every proof of betrayal. But I knew instinctively that this was the key. I handed it to him. Officer Ramirez unlocked it carefully, scrolling through the logs. Your emergency call went straight to voicemail, he noted. Multiple attempts, correct? Yes, I whispered, voice tight. I called him. He never answered. The officer made a note and looked up at me. Ma'am, your husband declined your emergency call. That's a serious detail. It doesn't prove intent yet, but it establishes obstruction. If he had any role in giving the driver false information, that will be significant in our investigation. I exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in. The room felt suddenly different. He had always been untouchable in my mind, like a phantom that hid behind the routines of our marriage. But now, evidence existed. Documentation. Proof of his absence at the moment I needed him most. I can't believe this, I murmured. I actually have proof. You do, Officer Ramirez confirmed. And it gives us options. Right now, your cooperation and honesty are essential, but you also have leverage over anyone who might have withheld help or misled others during your accident. The word leverage resonated in my chest. For months, maybe years, I'd felt powerless, invisible, replaced, ignored. And yet here, finally, I held something tangible that could shift the balance. I looked at the officer, gratitude and a flicker of determination in my eyes. What happens next? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scrolled through my call history one last time, nodding slowly. We'll verify your calls. The driver's account and your husband's inaction are now connected. This information can't be ignored. I nodded, my fingers gripping the hospital sheet as if I could anchor myself to this moment. For the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. The crash hadn't just injured me physically. It had unveiled the cracks in my life I'd tried to ignore. And now the law and the undeniable proof were on my side. But a question lingered in the back of my mind, icy and insistent. If he didn't answer my calls, why, and more importantly, what else had he been hiding? The next morning, my husband was brought in for questioning. He wore that same confident expression he always wore when he believed the world was gullible. And for a moment, I almost felt the old familiar pull to forgive, to smooth over, to pretend nothing had happened. Almost. Officer Ramirez began calmly. We need to verify your actions during the time of the accident. Your wife attempted multiple emergency calls that evening. Can you explain why none were returned? He straightened, cleared his throat, and gave the rehearsed line. Phone was on silent. Didn't see any calls or notifications. Honestly, I was tied up with work. Silent? I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. Not even one missed notification? He glanced at me briefly, then smiled tightly. Not a single one. I never received anything. The officer didn't respond immediately. He pulled out a small tablet and tapped it a few times. Sir, we have access to your smartwatch logs. They indicate your phone received calls at 9:14, 9:15, 9:17 p.m. And, according to the log, you saw the notifications and dismissed them. Multiple times, my chest constricted. My hands folded in my lap trembled. I had seen the messages. I had heard the silence. But seeing it documented in his own device, irrefutable, made it almost unbearable. He opened his mouth, faltered, and then stumbled through excuses that sounded hollow even to him. I must have accidentally dismissed them. I didn't realize it was her. The officer raised an eyebrow. Sir, the timestamps match exactly when your wife called from the crash site. The logs also show no attempted call back, or any message sent to check on her until much later. I could see the color drain from his face. It wasn't panic yet. He was still trying to control the narrative, but it was the first crack in his carefully built facade. Before he could respond further, another alert popped up on my phone. Sophie had posted a video from the same restaurant that night. I hesitated, then opened it. The video was long, a subtle, casual recording of the dinner. But one moment made me freeze. There he was, raising a glass, scrolling through his phone, completely unbothered. The timestamp blinked in the corner. 9:14 p.m. The exact minute I had been stranded on the roadside, bleeding and terrified. I replayed the clip, heart pounding. Every subtle glance down at his wrist, every swipe of the finger, every smirk as he put the phone away. It was a silent betrayal magnified into undeniable evidence. Officer Ramirez glanced at me and nodded subtly. We'll add this video to the file. It supports the smartwatch data. My husband tried again, desperate, his voice rising slightly. This is ridiculous. That video doesn't prove anything. It's just a moment. The officer interrupted, voice steady. Sir, we are not here to debate interpretation. The combination of your smartwatch log and third-party time-stamped video contradicts your account. This is documented evidence. The confidence drained from him completely. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered, and I realized just how thin his shield of lies had been. Years of deception, unkind words, subtle dismissals, all of it collapsing under the weight of technology and timing. I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by a deep, cold anger. I had been ignored, dismissed, and abandoned during one of the most terrifying nights of my life, and now it was all laid bare. The officer turned to me, his voice dropping slightly. Ma'am, given the evidence, you have options. His deliberate inaction, coupled with your documented attempts to reach him during an emergency, could constitute criminal negligence. He had a duty to respond when you were in imminent danger. I swallowed hard, feeling the power in the words, the gravity of what could finally happen. So, I could press charges? I asked cautiously, almost afraid of the answer. Yes, Officer Ramirez confirmed. You could file charges for negligent abandonment during an emergency. The evidence is strong, but it is your decision. The weight of it settled over me. I had spent months or years feeling powerless, like my voice didn't matter, like my instincts were wrong. And now, with all of this proof, I had the chance to reclaim control, not for revenge alone, but for justice, for recognition that my fear, my suffering, and my pain had value. I looked at him, my husband, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. The carefully constructed world he inhabited, the charming, confident mask he wore, it was all crumbling. He wasn't just caught in a lie. He was exposed, vulnerable, weak, human. And I realized something else, something thrilling and terrifying all at once. I didn't have to forgive him. Not now, not ever. Officer Ramirez waited patiently. Do you want to proceed or do you need some time? I took a deep, trembling breath, feeling both fear and a strange, exhilarating strength rise from deep inside. My voice came out steady, even if my hands shook. I want to proceed. The room seemed to shift at that moment. The air felt heavier, charged. The scales were tipping, and finally the truth, mine, undeniable, unignorable, was on my side. And for the first time since the accident, I felt like I had power. Real power. The knock at the door was sharp, echoing through the quiet of our suburban street. I watched from the living room window, still weak from the accident, as a detective and 2 uniformed officers stepped onto our porch. The neighbors, curious as always, had started to gather discreetly along the sidewalks. I felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. I had called the police into my private chaos, and now the world was watching, whether I wanted it to or not. My husband opened the door, already attempting the casual smile he thought disarmed people. The officers didn't return it. One stepped forward. "We are here regarding the incident last night involving your wife. We need to ask a few questions." He glanced at me, a half smile faltering, and turned back to the officers. "I already told everything at the hospital. You're overreacting." The word landed in the air like a brick. Overreacting. He really had no idea how damning that sounded. The officers didn't flinch. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes, took a step closer. "Sir, your inaction during an emergency, combined with information we've gathered, is a serious concern. We need to clarify your actions and intentions." He laughed nervously. "Serious concern, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was a minor accident. She's fine." The neighbors leaned forward, curiosity prying at their lips and eyes. I could see whispers passing down the line. For the first time, his private neglect and arrogance were becoming public. His carefully maintained image was cracking. The detective opened a small notebook. "We have evidence from phone logs, smartwatch data, and video from that night. Your failure to respond to your wife's emergency call is noted. Can you explain why you ignored it?" His smile vanished. He tried to shrug it off. I didn't see the call. Phone was on silent." One officer raised an eyebrow. "Your smartwatch logs indicate otherwise." Notifications were seen and dismissed multiple times. The color drained from his face. He shifted weight from foot to foot, muttering, It's not what it looks like." At that exact moment, the sound of high heels clicking against the driveway caught my attention. My husband's eyes flicked to the street, widening. Sophie appeared, seemingly casual, holding a small shopping bag. She waved at him cheerfully. "Hey, I thought I'd pop by and see how she's doing," she said loudly, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that she had just walked into the epicenter of his unraveling. My husband's face went pale, lips pressed into a thin line. His composure crumbled in front of the neighbors, in front of me, in front of the officers. He stuttered something about her just dropping by, but his eyes darted nervously toward the officers. Every word, every gesture betrayed him. The detective noted this, scribbling something into the notebook. "Sir," she said calmly, "your inaction and the presence of additional parties involved in your personal affairs during the incident are complicating factors. We may need to pursue further questioning at the station." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. His pride and bluster, the carefully maintained illusion of control he had cultivated for years, had no defense against the evidence, the witnesses, and the officers watching him. Neighbors who had once admired him for his charm now whispered to each other, glancing nervously at their phones, already anticipating gossip. The shift was subtle but undeniable. He looked smaller, exposed, human, and deeply guilty. Sophie, still smiling awkwardly, glanced at him. I'll just see you later," she said, and hurried down the sidewalk, leaving him stranded. His panic was silent but visible, the cracks in his confidence widening with each step she took away. One officer leaned in slightly, voice firm but quiet. "Sir, we are asking you to come down to the station for further questioning regarding potential obstruction of emergency assistance. This is a serious matter. You have the right to comply." His shoulders slumped, and the blush of shame spread across his face. I had never seen him like this. Out of control, exposed, and entirely at the mercy of the truth he had worked so hard to bury. I felt a strange, heavy satisfaction settle over me. The man who had ignored my cries, who had chosen another woman's company over my safety, who had gaslighted and betrayed me, was finally facing the consequences of his own actions. Publicly, irreversibly. As the officers guided him toward their vehicle, neighbors murmured, eyes following every step. I leaned back against the doorway, chest tight but steady, watching as the perfect image he had spent years crafting fell apart under the weight of evidence, witness accounts, and the undeniable truth of his neglect. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a measure of justice. And yet, even as he disappeared around the corner, I knew this wasn't the end. There were more truths to uncover, more lies to confront, and a reckoning that was only just beginning. By the time we reached the station, my husband was pale and stiff, like a marionette whose strings had been yanked loose. His usual confidence had evaporated somewhere between the driveway and the questioning room. He tried to mutter something about overreaction and misunderstanding, but the officers were already prepared with evidence that made excuses impossible. They began with a recap. We have logs from your smartwatch indicating multiple notifications of emergency calls from your wife during the accident, Officer Ramirez explained. You saw these calls and dismissed them. His mouth opened, then closed. He stammered, I was busy. She wasn't in danger, The officer held up a hand. Let's clarify a few details first. At that moment, Sophie was brought into the room. Her expression was nervous, hands clasped together. She had been summoned for questioning as a witness, and as soon as she saw my husband's face, a flicker of unease passed through her eyes. The officers asked her to recount the evening. She shifted uncomfortably, but the pressure of the investigation made her words tumble out. He told me she was fine, she admitted, voice trembling slightly, that he had to finish the dinner, that it was important for work. He said not to worry about her, that she was just resting at home. My chest tightened. The words were like ice in my veins. He had lied, systematically to both of us, creating an elaborate cover to justify his absence while I struggled for my life. The officers exchanged glances, then turned back to him. Sir, are you aware that your actions, or lack thereof, could be considered criminal? Your smartwatch logs, combined with Ms. Sophie's statement, directly contradict your earlier claims of ignorance. He opened his mouth, searching for some loophole, some invisible escape hatch, but nothing came. His hands twisted in his lap, his jaw tight. The confidence that had carried him through years of deception had disappeared. He was exposed, careless, and caught. You see, sir, the officer continued, your decision to ignore multiple emergency calls, coupled with your own admissions to Ms. Sophie that you were busy and that your wife was fine, demonstrates a willful neglect during a critical emergency. This isn't merely a civil matter. It has legal implications. He swallowed, his eyes darting from the officers to the floor, back to Sophie, then finally to me. There was no mask left, no charm, no rehearsed excuses, only the stark, undeniable reality of being caught. I watched him squirm as Sophie added more detail. He even said he'd check on her later, but that it would be after dessert and drinks. She confessed, voice barely audible. He made it sound casual, like it wasn't urgent. The words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Rage and disbelief collided with a strange, simmering relief. This wasn't coming from me. It wasn't my accusation or my anger propelling this confrontation. It was evidence, witnesses, facts. The truth was being revealed objectively, without my intervention, and it carried the full weight of justice. Officer Ramirez leaned forward. Sir, do you have anything further to add? He shook his head, silent. The room held him in a tight, unspoken grip of accountability. Turning back to me, the officer said softly but firmly, Ma'am, based on the evidence we have, the smartwatch logs, the witness statement, and your documented attempts to reach him, your husband's abandonment during an emergency qualifies for legal penalty. My throat tightened, a mix of vindication and lingering sorrow making it hard to breathe. The words weren't triumphant, not yet. They were simply factual, an acknowledgement of the truth I had been screaming silently for months, a recognition that I had been failed in the most intimate, terrifying way. He looked up at me then, eyes wide and uncomprehending, as though seeing me for the first time in years. No smile, no excuse, no charm could mask the reality. He had been caught, utterly and completely, by his own carelessness. The officers began discussing procedural details with him. while I leaned back, exhausted but grounded. The rush of fear from the accident, the betrayal, and the lies had given way to a steady, sharp clarity. The system had finally caught up with him, and for once, the power dynamic had shifted. I realized that justice didn't always require drama or confrontation from me directly. Sometimes it simply required patience, evidence, and letting the truth speak for itself. For the first time since the crash, I felt a calm resolve. The reckoning had begun, and it wasn't based on my anger alone. It was rooted in facts, witnesses, and undeniable proof that he had failed in the one role that truly mattered when it counted the most: being present for the person he vowed to protect. And as I sat there, watching him sit silently under the weight of the truth, I understood that some victories were quiet, measured, and infinitely more powerful than any confrontation I could have orchestrated myself. The moment of exposure had arrived. Not from me, not from threats, but from reality itself. And it was more satisfying than I could have imagined. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, but I barely noticed. I sat across from her, hands folded, trying to steady the mix of adrenaline and exhaustion coursing through me. She laid out the facts methodically: Smartwatch logs, witness testimony, restaurant receipts, bank statements. Everything lined up like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve until it was too late to ignore. "Ma'am," she said, voice calm but firm, "this isn't just infidelity or neglect. His actions during the accident, ignoring emergency calls, leaving you vulnerable, constitute grounds for divorce. And given the financial evidence, you're in a very strong position." I felt a strange weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't just relief. It was power. For years I had been made to feel small, secondary, replaceable. But now the cards were in my hands. The narrative that had always seemed locked in his favor, the one where I was overreacting, emotional, or dramatic, was crumbling. The lawyer leaned forward. "You don't have to act out of revenge. You can act with strategy. Your legal position ensures both safety and financial protection. You don't need to beg for justice. It's already there." I nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt calm, clear, unshakable. The fear, the uncertainty, the helplessness. They were replaced by something heavier and steadier: resolve. I left the office with a quiet determination that surprised even me. The hospital had been where I recovered physically, but this was where I began to reclaim my life. Walking into our home, I saw him in the living room, lounging in the way he always had, oblivious, or pretending to be, to the storm about to hit. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm in or demand explanations. That wasn't necessary. I simply held up my phone, showing him the lawyer's summary, the documentation, the timeline of his neglect. His eyes widened. He tried to speak, to regain control, but I didn't let him. I only said quietly, with a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos he had caused. "I survived my accident. Our marriage didn't." The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. There was no argument to be had, no charm to deflect the truth. He sat frozen, his pride and ego colliding with reality, powerless to undo what had been laid bare. I walked past him without another word. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he had tried to steal: my dignity, my safety, my agency. The house that had once felt like a cage now felt neutral. Just walls and furniture, no longer a stage for his deception. Later, I gathered the police documentation and receipts from the restaurant, proof of his deliberate negligence and misuse of the company credit card. I knew exactly where it needed to go. His employer had a right to know. He had flaunted his disregard for ethics and personal responsibility under the guise of work, and now it was going to be exposed. As I prepared the envelope, a sense of satisfaction crept over me. Not the vengeful kind that burns, but a measured, controlled satisfaction that comes from knowing the truth is in my hands, and that justice could now proceed without my emotional exhaustion clouding it. I paused for a moment, feeling the weight of the weeks behind me, the fear, the betrayal, the isolation. And yet, for the first time, I felt lighter. The world hadn't crushed me. I hadn't collapsed under the weight of his lies. I had endured. I had survived. And now the balance was shifting. The scales were tipping. Power was mine, steady and deliberate, and I wasn't afraid to use it. I looked back once at him, sitting frozen on the couch, and smiled faintly. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't frantic. I was free. And in that calm, quiet way, the first real step of my life after him began. Weeks passed, and the aftermath of the accident rippled through my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. My husband's world crumbled with a speed that was almost surreal. His employer launched an internal investigation after receiving the documentation showing misuse of company funds at the luxury restaurant, combined with proof of his inaction during my emergency. Conversations that had once been whispers behind closed doors became pointed questions from colleagues and supervisors. The man who had seemed untouchable in our social circles was now facing the consequences of his carelessness and deception. The legal system moved slowly but steadily. His smartwatch logs, the video evidence from the restaurant, and the witness statements built a strong case for negligent abandonment. Lawyers contacted him, paperwork arrived, and he sat in courtrooms looking smaller, humbled, and exposed. Public humiliation followed naturally, a combination of gossip, social media chatter, and polite but pointed questions from friends and acquaintances who had once admired him. The veneer of charm he relied on to navigate the world had cracked irreparably. Watching all this unfold, I felt a strange mix of vindication and relief, tempered with sorrow for the years lost to lies and neglect. But more than anything, I felt clarity. The accident that nearly ended my life became the catalyst for the ending of a marriage that had long been toxic, emotionally draining, and dishonest. The fear, anger, and heartbreak I had carried began to give way to a new rhythm, a rhythm I controlled. I moved slowly, intentionally, reclaiming the parts of myself that had been suppressed for years. Simple things felt monumental, making decisions for myself, choosing where to live, how to spend my time, and how to surround myself with people who truly cared. Independence wasn't a burden. It was freedom, a tangible, solid proof that I could survive, thrive, and even flourish without him. Healing became my priority. Therapy sessions, quiet mornings with coffee by the window, walks without agendas. These were the small steps that rebuilt me. I laughed again, fully and without guilt. I cried without shame. I felt the full spectrum of my emotions, knowing that none of it would be dismissed or ignored anymore. In moments of reflection, I realized how narrowly I had escaped total disaster. The accident could have ended everything. It could have taken my life in an instant, leaving everything unresolved and forever tinged with regret. Instead, it ended the marriage, a far more insidious danger than any car wreck. What had once felt like a terrifying loss became an opportunity. The wreck destroyed my vehicle, but his choices destroyed our union. And from both, I emerged with the chance to rebuild. I thought often about the lessons embedded in those weeks of chaos. I learned that self-respect and boundaries are non-negotiable, that the people who claim love but abandon you in the moments that matter are not deserving of your energy or loyalty. That justice, when combined with courage and patience, has a way of correcting what seemed irreparably broken. Sitting in my new apartment, sunlight spilling across the floor, I finally allowed myself to whisper aloud the truth I had carried silently. The accident broke my car. His choices broke our marriage, but both gave me a chance to rebuild. Stronger, and stronger I was. Every scar, every sleepless night, every betrayal became a brick in the foundation of a life I owned entirely. Free from fear, free from lies, free from the invisible chains that had bound me for too long. The wreck had taken a car. The wreck and him had returned my life. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the weight of it all settle. Peace, real and unshakable, finally felt like mine.